Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons says that agents will arrest anyone here illegally, regardless of whether they have a criminal record. Is this expanding the scope of the operation? Joining us live to discuss is Jonay Wartell, Democratic strategist and former senior advisor to the Harris-Walz campaign, along with Malik Abdul, Republican strategist and radio host. Thank you both very much for joining us here. The ICE director also signaled a crackdown on companies that knowingly hire illegal immigrants. Jonay, what's your reaction? How do you think this will all be enforced?
Well, it still stands that so many of these policies need reform, and that's not something we've seen coming out of this administration or out of this White House. So reforms are still needed on a number of these policies. But be reminded that so many of our industries across the country overwhelmingly do depend on immigrant labor, many of which is undocumented. And so this is going to have a disproportionate impact on many of those industries that rely on this labor. And in many ways, the folks who are being detained do not have criminal records, or in a lot of cases do not have reasons to be detained. And so we see that these sweeping policies, the way that they're being implemented without reforms, are having disproportionate impacts on the workforce and are unfairly detaining many of whom are not a threat to our society, even in the slightest. So reforms are needed for these policies before we can talk about an equitable implementation.
Malik, your response, and then what do you make of concerns that this could hurt American companies, particularly those in agriculture?
Well, I think if you look at, and it was great reporting, by the way, if you look at what the numbers are, even if you look at the polls, what people show that they are supportive of the administration's effort to actually shut the border down. I think maybe what we're getting into now is that people seeing that, well, you know what? The border seems okay at this point, and I think it actually provides an opportunity for people to look at the implementation of the policy. Overall, people are supportive of the administration's efforts around immigration reform. What some of the questions are, obviously, is how they've gone about it. So I think that's one of the things that the administration has to focus on, and it needs to continue to focus on that because people are concerned regarding the businesses, though. I'm one of those who said, if you're going to be just picking up people off the streets or wherever it is, whether it's in a courtroom or whether it's on a farm or whatever, then you also need to hold businesses accountable. So you cannot just go after people in the country for being here illegally without holding accountable the businesses that actually hire them. The administration is going to have to focus on the businesses too.
Makes sense. Takes two to tango. But Harvard University and the Trump administration faced off in court today in an ongoing battle over federal funding. Jonay, where do you see this heading? Do you think that either party is likely to back down?
Well, be clear, this is about political retaliation. This is not about accountability. And research, particularly medical and technical and scientific research, should be protected from political retaliation. All of this is happening because Harvard did not bow to the Trump administration. And they really do represent other institutions as well who could potentially be unfairly targeted in the future. So I think Harvard taking a stance and a hard line is important. I think that what they have signaled will be the impact of these funds being frozen is that medical and technical and scientific research will be impacted. One of the reasons why America is a leader in the national and international stage in research is because we invest the funds, and now we are putting that status and that research in jeopardy. And the American people and folks internationally will lose out on the benefits of that research, and that's something everyone should be concerned about.
Malik, what do you see the goal for the Trump administration being here? Are they trying to make an example out of Harvard?
Yes, absolutely. And Harvard being the stellar institution that it is. Now, Harvard stepped into it some years ago. Obviously, we know what happened during the protests over anti-Semitism, the pro-Palestinian protests. We saw what happened then, and Harvard dropped the ball in a number of areas when it came to protecting the Jewish students on campus. I'm one of those Republicans who've said many times before that I'm not comfortable with the federal government dictating certain things when it comes to institutions, and that would include Harvard University. But as I'm listening to people much smarter than me in the legal community, the administration is arguing the language of the grant for grantees. And I think that they may actually be able to prevail in court. It's not whether or not it's politicized or these are grants coming from the federal government, and the federal government does have the authority to rescind some of that. So whether or not it happens ultimately in the end, I don't know, but this is definitely, you asking me, is this something that the Trump administration wants to use as an example? Absolutely. He wants to use Harvard as an example, even though I don't necessarily agree with some of the positions that the administration has taken.
I want to move a bit to a lighter note. President Trump took to social media to call on the MLB's Cleveland Guardians and NFL's Washington Commanders to revert to their former names, the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins. He says, quote, our great Indian people in massive numbers want this to happen. Their heritage and prestige is systematically being taken away from them. Malik, could going back to naming teams after Native Americans be seen in a positive light?
Well, I'm a Washington, D.C., a longtime Washington, D.C. resident, and I remember it was last fall when it was Elon Musk who threw this notion out there that somehow there was a bill before Congress that would basically fund a stadium in D.C. I want your audience to know any funding for the stadium will be paid by people like me, the taxpayers of the District of Columbia. This is something, Donald Trump is trolling here. And from what I understand, there is no authority that Donald Trump has to actually stop the bill because, again, there is no funding coming from the federal government. I see people are excited about this, but as someone who lives in the District of Columbia, I've been opposed to the Washington Commanders name now. But what I'm hearing from people here in the city specifically is now that Donald Trump is for reverting the names back to the Redskins. They are absolutely for Washington Commanders being the name. And the owner himself, Josh, I can't remember his last name, has said that the name is not going to change.
Janae, what's your take?
Well, I think we should ask ourselves why the President of the United States is focused on this amidst all the other things he should be deeply concerned about. But this is really just another chapter in the Trump administration's culture wars, right? Their ability to take on this very minuscule, very seemingly non-threatening issue and make it a conversation about race, about ethnicity, and the like. I think what's important to say here is that words have power, and the legacy of those words have power. And when we think about the naming of many of these sports teams, they do harken back to a time where minority groups were not treated ethically. And so understanding that we are looking forward to the future of these sports teams, yes, we can honor the past and the legacy of these teams, but also look forward and say, is it really going to affect how these sports teams play ball if they have a different name? It really won't. And it is an opportunity for them to honor the legacy of the past while also looking to the future and finding a naming that, reflects those sets of values.
Janae Wartell and Malik Abdul, thank you both very much for coming on. Really appreciate your perspectives.